So, in today's episode, I talk with Caleb Merrill from the Avalanche Hour podcast. It seemed pretty fitting for the timing as we approach the deep winter days. Not so much here in Alaska. It's been raining. It's January 22nd as I finish up these edits on this episode here, and it's been raining, so that's kind of a bummer. But for the rest of you, it's snowing. So please listen in as we talk about common mistakes while recreating during the winter and ways to stay safe this season in avalanche terrain. I hope you enjoy. Okay, cool. So we are recording now. Thanks again, Caleb, for being on the show with me. I'm super psyched to have you on and to learn from you. We've kind of messaged a few times in the years past, so it's been really nice to have you as a friend and as a resource as I was getting started with my podcast. And so yeah, I'm super psyched to have your expertise and your knowledge here with us. There's so much to learn from avalanche safety, and you being the host and producer of the Avalanche Hour podcast, there's so much that I know that you could share with me and the guests to hopefully have more knowledge moving into the winter season. So thanks for being on the show. And yeah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Well, thanks, Ashley. Yeah, thanks for inviting me on to the Sharp End podcast. I've been a fan of the podcast for a long time, and I think it's just a great thing that you have going on, sharing stories of real people's adventures and the days that they didn't imagine were going to go exactly how they ended up going. But yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I've learned a lot from a lot of the guests on the Avalanche Hour podcast, and in addition to just my 18 or so years as a avalanche professional in a variety of different aspects of the industry. So I guess just to introduce myself, I got my start ski patrolling in the Wasatch. I finished college in Vermont and ventured west to find more vertical relief and a little more consistent powder snow, and found that in the Wasatch, and started ski patrolling at Solitude. And I was super fortunate there to be there at a good time to kind of, for better or worse, like move up in the ranks of the ski patrol fairly quickly. And there was a lot of avalanche mitigation being done with explosives at that ski area, a lot of hand routes. And so the newer patrollers were thrown right into it, which was like more than I could have ever asked for as a rookie ski patroller, like getting to go up on the ridge with a pack full of shots and just trigger avalanches with explosives. Like, I mean, there were many times when I was like, I couldn't believe that they were paying me to do this. It was like a total dream job for me. So, and we had a bit of ski guiding that we did from the ski resort there. We had like a lift accessed backcountry ski touring program. So I got into a little bit of light ski tour guiding during that time, and just learned a ton from other ski patrollers and avalanche forecasters there, and kind of started being the assistant to the role of avalanche mitigation director there. So great kind of foundational background into, really, I think the biggest thing that I learned there or experienced there was just seeing so many avalanches in motion during avalanche control work, during that mitigation. When life happens, and I met my wife there, and she went back to school and ended up getting a job in Oregon. So we kind of pulled pitch from the Wasatch and moved to Oregon. And at that time, I reached out to the Royer family in Lamoille, Nevada, and I started heli ski guiding for Ruby Mountain heli skiing. So a bit of a remote job for me, like traveling 10 hours down to the Rubies from Oregon, and did that for 7 years or so, 7 or 8 years. And these days I work in northeastern Oregon in the Wallowas, kind of a little known mountain range that's kind of under the radar, but has some amazing skiing potential. And I work as an avalanche forecaster for the Wallowa Avalanche Center. And I work as a ski tour guide out of Yurts in the Wallowas as well.
Wow. Lucky you. Where in Oregon do you and your wife live now?
Well, we're kind of in the midst of moving like this month, actually, from the southwest corner of Oregon in the Rogue Valley, and we're moving to the northeastern corner. So kind of the longest stretch of actually still being in Oregon, but kind of the longest stretch diagonally across the state for our move out to the Wallowas. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're going to kind of work or live kind of where you work, which will be nice.
It'll be nice. Yeah, it's been, I don't know, it's been 12 or 13 years since I've been able to like go back to like home after a day of work ski guiding and or avalanche forecasting. So I'm looking forward to that consistency, and yeah, it'll be really nice. And I guess the other part there is I've been coming up to Alaska for the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, doing some heli ski guiding in the springtime up there, which is amazing as well.
What heliop are you doing that with?
I've actually decided not to go back this year. I'm as you kind of alluded to, I'm looking forward to like staying at home and digging some roots. And living in Medford, Oregon, has allowed me to travel quite a bit for winter work and experience lots of different snowpacks and different operations and stuff. And so that was one advantage to living somewhere where I didn't feel like I could be fully entertained for a full winter. And so yeah. So I'm actually not going back up there, but I've been working with Chugach powder guides the last bunch of years, going up to Girdwood there.
Oh yeah, that's only 30 minutes from my house.
Yeah, totally. Right down the street.
And yeah, CPG has a really awesome crew.
Oh man, it's the
I know a
best.
few of the guides there, and yeah, they've got a really awesome crew there. So that's a pretty neat thing that you were on board with. No, I'm sure they'll always have you back.
Yeah, they say they will.
You could be the star guide. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you said about like having a good crew, like the culture there, the culture that they've created and facilitate is one of the best that I've experienced in terms of like ski guiding operations that I've worked for. So
Yeah, cool. That's great to hear. Right on. Well, yeah, again, thanks for being on the show. And, before I hit the record button, we kind of talked about, what I was hoping to get out of this episode. And like I said, it's November 11th today. And so we're flirting with winter here in Alaska, at least. And so I was kind of hoping I could get some, some trends that you're seeing on your podcast, and ways that, we can help mitigate or at least give guests more knowledge, because knowledge is power, to help people be safe in the mountains this winter. So yeah, really looking forward to hearing what you can teach me and us, and what you can offer. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Feel free to just jump right in.
well, yeah, I'm super excited to talk about this stuff, and and some of these things that I think can keep us safer boil down to like being very aware of how our conditions as humans and our desire to ski or ride powder can really cloud our judgment in terms of what's going on out there. And so I think a lot of the things of to riff on your theme of how to play hard and be smart this winter are to kind of give some introspection to your skills and ability and knowledge, and your ability to say no, your ability to turn around in the face of having some really tasty looking powder snow staring you right in the face. And so I guess I would just start out by saying I think it can be a good approach to make a plan to further your avalanche education, no matter where you are along this journey of traveling in avalanche terrain in a winter environment. And so, I like to think of avalanche courses as very similar to a woofer course or a CPR course, right? Like we need to go get our woofer refreshers every 2 years. Same with CPR, and I think it should be the same with avalanche courses. And that's kind of a cultural thing that I think is shifting. And maybe it's a marketing issue from avalanche education providers, but I think kind of changing the structure of that, or the way that we think about avalanche education, as opposed to just doing one and done and checking the box. This is a continual thing. And there are so many great resources out there, whether they're, online or in person avalanche refresher courses, or, definitely taking a rescue course every 2 or 3 years is certainly recommended, because there's always new information that's coming out, new studies that are being done on the most efficient way to excavate somebody that's been buried in an avalanche. So other resources that I think are super useful are the snow and avalanche workshops. So the regional snow and avalanche workshops, many avalanche centers are putting these on. And so there's probably a snow and avalanche workshop that is happening or has happened near you. And a lot of them you can view the recording. The Chugach National Forest Avalanche Information Center up by where you're at, they just had their snow and avalanche workshop, and they always post the recording for free on their site, a few weeks after it happens. Some of them you have to pay for, but the Wyoming Snow and Avalanche Workshop is another great one that's free and is up on Vimeo right now. So lots of ways you can further your education. I think one super underutilized way to further your education as you progress in your backcountry endeavors is to hire a guide.
Yeah,
It's kind of a shameless plug coming from a guide, but I think that's super underutilized in the US. You go to Europe.
I agree.
Yeah, you go to Europe, even Canada, and like these really, people that are very experienced in the backcountry are hiring guides, and it sometimes it just makes it more fun. But like in terms of furthering your education, like, put your guide to work. Say like, hey, I've been really working on creating my tour plans for the last year. Like I learned how to do it in my avalanche course, and like I want some feedback on these tour plans. So like, how about I plan this tour and we go out and you give me some feedback on that? Or something I'm really struggling is like terrain evaluation. And so I'd like to go out into the terrain and pick your brain about what we're seeing and how to kind of manage this terrain in given avalanche problems or given hazard levels for the day. So I think that's something that's like, I think culturally, like Americans, we kind of just have this like can do attitude, and we're just going to like push through and just like be the bull and just kind of like, we're going to get it done. Right. Like, let's do this. We can do this by ourselves.
I always like when like digging pits, and every guide and every avalanche professional has like a unique way of recording their pit results in their notebook. And so I just love learning from each new person about how they do it, how they record their pit and their book, and just really digging into the snow science, because all the avalanche courses I've ever taken, you spend so much time ski touring. You have your first day in the class, but then your second day is usually in the field, and you spend so much time on the ski tour to get where you're going, which I think is such a waste of the course itself. I would much rather plot myself in zone where you can gather a bunch of different pit results and just have my head in the snow pit to like really dig in, like no pun intended, but dig into like the meat of the science behind what's happening in the snowpack versus spending 4 to 6 hours ski touring to dig one pit. Right? It's always been a struggle for me.
Yeah, I think on one hand I agree with you. I think on the other hand, like the more time that we spend in like one location looking at one snow pit, that's great. That's like one data point, which is great.
It's one data point.
Yeah, and so it's funny you say that because like I've really started enjoying teaching motorized avalanche education on my snowmobile, because like we can see so much more terrain
Right.
and just buzz around and just get like such a better picture of what's going on.
Get different aspects.
Yeah, totally.
That's really good advice. I've never taken a motorized Abbey course, but being I have two sleds, and we my partner also has a Super Cub, so we do a lot of ski plane flying and sled skiing. But I've never taken a motorized Abbey course, so I think that'd be really good for me to do this winter.
Yeah, because you're kind of viewing the terrain in a totally different mode than skiing. At least I do when I'm riding. So I think another thing that is kind of great to think about this time of year, especially in places where people are already starting to get out, and those, from what I'm seeing, is like mostly Colorado and Alaska right now, where there is enough snow to recreate. And of course, if there's enough snow to ride, then there's enough snow to slide, right? And so tracking the early season conditions is super important. And like the snow that we're skiing on or riding on right now, it could be a weak layer within the snowpack later down the road. And so just starting to track what's going on, how much snow's on the ground. If we go into a long period of high pressure, maybe we'll get a bunch of melting going on solar aspects, but this snow is going to probably stick around on all the shady aspects. And And so kind of tracking where that is and where that might be a problem later in the future is super important. And most of the avalanche forecast centers are doing that work for you, but maybe kind of looking through their Instagram reels or looking at the observations that are being posted on the website and kind of making notes in your notebook of how much snow there is and where it is and what the surface is doing over time, because that's super important to having. I kind of think about it as like the suspects, like I can get sucked into true crime sometimes, and or like the first 48 and stuff. And so I think about some of these like weather events and the snow that's on the ground or surface conditions as like the suspects that might be involved in a crime later down the winter. And so I want to kind of like profile what those suspects are looking like and where they like to hang out, and some of their activities and what they tend to do when they get riled up.
Big wind events that have happened.
Totally. Wind events or long stretches of high pressure where, we're getting solar crust or melt freeze crust on solar aspects, maybe a faceting or weakening of the snow surface on more shady aspects, especially where the snowpack might not be very, very deep yet. So tracking the early season conditions and then keeping up with that and having a mental map of what's going on in the snowpack throughout the whole winter. And like I said, just like lean on your public avalanche center. Your forecasters are doing like most of that work, and they'll, if you're out, submit observations, not just the early season, but the whole season long, like submit observations to your avalanche center. It's like, it's so helpful as a forecaster to get good information. Even just pictures from people are super helpful. So I think another thing that can be really helpful this time of year, like especially as the days are getting shorter and there's maybe a little bit less outside time for many of us, at least in the daylight hours, is to spend some time on your computer and look at good terrain options of areas that you frequent. And so much like we do in a guiding operation, we have a terrain atlas and we have a run list. And so we know many of these runs very well where we're ski guiding. And so same for skiing or snowboarding or snow machining in your local zone. Like get down to the nitty gritty and look at, there's so many mapping resources out there now, and really come up with some good terrain options for different level of hazard. So, the low hazard options, like you're going to have many low hazard options. But as you start going into more of like your moderate or your considerable or your high avalanche hazard regimes, like you're probably going to be limited by those options. So like find some places that you can go meadow skipping when it's considerable avalanche hazard, right? Like where you're going to be kind of stress free about, like it's not even an option to get caught in an avalanche because you've taken all the terrain that's capable of producing avalanches off the table. And so spending some time right now in the fall, early winter, to kind of look through that terrain, see if you can find aerial photos of that terrain, look at Gaia or Onyx or CalTopo. Google Earth is great, and just kind of like dig into like what does the terrain look like in terms of slope steepness, aspect, terrain features, maybe even ground roughness. Like, is this like a really grassy slope in the summer, spring, and fall? Or is it just like rocky with big cavernous areas that are going to create maybe more basal facet weaknesses and stuff like that? So do your due diligence in terms of like investigating terrain options, and that's kind of like recreating like a professional, like coming up with a terrain atlas and coming up with an actual run list, which we can get into like how to utilize a run list in that way here in a little bit. But yeah, I think there's some homework that can be done this time of year that's going to set you up for success to investigate terrain options. One thing I really like to do that I think sets myself up for success is to pack my pack the night before. I don't know about you, Ashley, but like sometimes like I can get up in the morning and I'm like even just 10 minutes behind, and I hate making people wait for me. So I can feel like kind of scattered in the morning. And if I don't have my pack packed for a ski tour or like a sled mission, it's all over. Like I just like my whole day is thrown off. And so taking the time and like clear headed in the evening to make sure that I have my packs packed is super helpful. And it just creates more,
I do the same thing.
yeah, creates more bandwidth for me in the morning when like I'm actually thinking about planning the day, right? So I don't always do it, and whenever I don't do it, I regret it, right? Like feel scattered. But yeah, like kind of going with what we were talking about with terrain options, really being able to create good habits around your tour planning. And you can get this from, if you're not familiar with this, like this is what we talk about in a level 1 avalanche course, is like how to make a good tour plan and how to look at all of the information from the avalanche forecast, the weather forecast, how to assess our group and our group's abilities, and skills and knowledge to come up with an appropriate tour that's going to match our experience level and our knowledge and match our levels of uncertainty. Like that's this whole game of recreating an avalanche terrain is, and doing anything in the mountains really, is like so steeped in uncertainty. And if you're trying to reduce that uncertainty to zero, like you're only kidding yourself. Like it's not going to happen. So managing that uncertainty starts with a good tour plan, I think.
Do you have an example of a tour plan, like a maybe a blank tour plan that I could add in the show notes for listeners to be able to use as a reference?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Like, I mean, there are many ways to do it, right? And I teach ARI courses, although the Alaska Avalanche School is an amazing school. The Silverton Avalanche School is an amazing school. American Avalanche Institute, all of these providers that are recognized by the American Avalanche Association, the A3 recognized rec providers, do a great job. So I can share what an ARI tour plan looks like.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be great. And I'll make sure, yeah, I'll put it in the show notes for listeners. If they've never done a tour plan, it'll be a good example to reference off of.
I'll be the first to admit it. Like when you first do this, if you're used to just going out into the backcountry all willy nilly and just kind of like figuring it out there, which I know a lot of people do, and I've done that before as well, the tour plan is going to feel a little bit like homework. But like we want a repeatable process that we can come back to every time we go in the backcountry that's going to help us manage our risk. And that's really what it's doing. It's slowing things down. It's creating a repeatable risk management process. So creating those good habits, and just like creating any good habits in our lives, like it takes a little bit of work to break the old habits and develop the new ones. I think some essential parts of creating a good tour plan are creating options. So if things are different than we expect when we get out there, we have something that we can always fall back to more conservative terrain. And there should always kind of be an option of like just not going into avalanche terrain, or like maybe we shouldn't even go to the parking lot. Like maybe we should, like it's considerable avalanche hazard, which I won't go totally down this road, but that's a really tricky level to manage. And I think a lot of people think they can manage considerable avalanche hazard, and it's not that easy. And there's actually a lot of people that think maybe we shouldn't have considerable avalanche hazard. Maybe it should just bump from moderate to high, right? Because like when we actually dig into what is considerable avalanche hazard, natural avalanches are possible. Okay, so they might just come out of the blue, like naturally triggered avalanches. But human triggered avalanches are likely. And it's like, okay, I'm a human. I'm going into avalanche terrain or near avalanche terrain. It's likely that I'm going to trigger an avalanche. Like what part of our rational brain like makes that seem okay?
It's a scare. It's the human factor for me right out of the gate. That's the answer. Is like, okay, well, I am, most people, maybe not post COVID actually anymore, but previously most people were weekend warriors, right? But now post COVID, it seems like most of my friends are not working, day jobs. So I don't know if that's so much the truth anymore, but anyway, I don't want to get hung up on that. But yeah, so it's like, okay, well, it's nice weather today. It's going to be poor weather for the next 5 days, or whatever I can see through the forecast through windy, like it's going to be poor weather. And so today's the only day that I can go out and get some turns in. And also today is the only day that my friend, my ski partner, can go with me too. So it's like, okay, today's the only day. Let's get after it, no matter what. And so it's a scare. Like out of the gate, I just it's scarcity for me. It's like this is the only day that we can make this happen. So let's just make it happen, which should not be the case. That should not be scarcity. Should not be the reason why we push past those factors, those risk factors, and we ignore them. It should not be the reason.
Yeah. What's our priority here? You know, is it skiing that line or is it like coming home at the end of the day? Like, you should really ask yourself that every day. What is my priority today? It should be, I hope it's to come home smiling, you know? But yeah, it's funny you say that because I have a note here that says see beyond the scarcity. Like, what's your priority? Short-sighted gains of endorphins or social acceptance or learning how to play the long game, you know? And like they say that, you know, the kind of the catchy phrase is you can be old or you can be bold, but you can't be both in this game, right? And so like learning how to um, play the long game, I think, is super important. Um, so within our tour plans, creating options and always having options that are more conservative in terms of your terrain selection than less conservative. And I also like to identify like good decision points in the terrain. So like, okay, once we gain this ridge line, we've been maybe traveling for about an hour. Like maybe we should just like stop and check in with each other, check in with what we're seeing in terms of the snowpack conditions and the weather conditions. Are we seeing any red flags, recent avalanches, wind loaded snow, you know, rapid rates of accumulation from storm snow, rising temperatures, things like that. Let's check in with each other because, you know, our collective sets of eyes are way better than just my two eyes. And so creating decision points in the terrain. And then I don't know if anybody else uses this term, but I use the term trigger points more from like wildland fire. But like, okay, if we're seeing precip intensity rates of greater than an inch an hour for 3 hours, you know, like we're going to ratchet back our terrain selection. Or if we're seeing, you know, like clear identifiers within the snowpack or something like that will allow us to close terrain in the field. And you know, I think something that's totally underutilized that most ski guiding operations use is a run list. And I've used that term a couple times now, but like after you've created your run list in the fall or early winter, like use it and close terrain before you go out there, utilizing the forecast. And the avalanche forecast is going to tell you exactly where the forecasters think the problem lives in the terrain. And so you can do a really skookum job of closing some of that terrain before you even go out into the field and are tempted by it. So close some ski runs and open some ski runs. And, you know, as we do it when ski guiding, you can always close an open run in the field by, you know, new information new shit has come to light. And you're like, no way am I going to jump on that thing today. So we can close that, but we can never open a closed run in the field because that's kind of leaning too much into our human factors of perhaps desire. So
You mentioned earlier about communication and stopping and checking in with your partner. But it's also for me, it's like knowing my partner and having and being not only knowing my partner, but also being the good partner. Like I won't go out with somebody who doesn't have their Avalanche 1 and ideally their Abby 2 and also have their wilderness first responder. Like I won't go out with people that don't have those. And I'm not saying that, you know, if you have those certs, you're an expert. You're probably less than an expert because it's like the more you know, like the less you know, right? You know, when I took my Abby 1 and my Abby 2, I became the more I knew, the more scared I was. And I think that's really shocking, right? It's like ignorance is bliss, but I won't go out with someone who doesn't actually at least have those certs. And you know, like you mentioned before, you can have that cert, but you could have taken that course 5 or 6 years ago, and that knowledge is probably expired, right? Or you've forgotten it. So, you know, being the good partner by having the knowledge and communicating with your partner, and also knowing what resources and knowledge your partner has, so you guys can really learn from each other and keep the conversation going in and out of the field.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, you can never take good communication for granted. And you can never assume that good communication is going to take place, like, especially with newer partners. And so, like, I totally agree. Like, thinking really hard about who you want to go spend time in the mountains with in this environment is a really good idea. And I feel like that's a trend that I've seen, like, peripherally, and maybe I'm just casting too much judgment, but I feel like, kind of like, right before COVID and then kind of through COVID, it seems like there's just lots of, like, kind of social party skiing and riding going on in, like, popular areas. And, if you're in non-avalanche terrain or very simple terrain and low hazard, like, maybe that's okay. But, like, well, I think long and hard before I, like, accept an invitation from somebody to go out into avalanche terrain with. And sometimes I have to make that hard no, and it's flirting on the edge of, like, maybe hurting somebody's feelings. But if I know I'm not going to communicate well with this person, or there's just, like, weird undertones, I just won't go. So I think finding good partners and being a good partner, as you said, is a huge part of staying safe in avalanche terrain. And the communication skills that are learned and practiced during your outing out there, in terms of, like we said, like, checking in, like, how is this communication going? Like, if you and I are talking and I feel, or you feel like I'm just not listening to anything you're saying, like, well, like, maybe it's time to call it, and or maybe that's good feedback that you can give me, and that person can create some awareness about their communication styles. But, like, good communication takes practice, and kind of intentional practice. And so I think, and I there's so many of these things that I can't remember, like, where they came to me from, or so I may not attribute them to the right person. But, the speech of, kind of, this might have been a Sarah Boylan thing, of will, want, won't, like, in terms of, like, determining what ski objectives we might be going after. Like, that's really helped me, of, like, let's put these in terms of, like, no, I won't go ski that, and kind of work towards not having mitigated speech that kind of talks around the problem. Like, we should be scared by things in the backcountry avalanche environment. And so it should be okay to say, like, I'm scared of that. And, like, as soon as, like, one person says that, like, we need to find a different, more simple terrain, more conservative terrain. Like,
Time to close that run.
time to close that run in the field, for sure. Or maybe
Hmm.
we make that decision in the coffee shop before we even get to the pass. Like, we're just not going to go there today. So yeah, I think communication skills are learned and practiced. And one thing that I've kind of come across lately is that there's this guy, Richard Bothwell. He used to be the executive director of ARI. He's down in Truckee, and he and a buddy have come up with this thing called Slab Lab, and they're really digging into communication techniques. And if you haven't checked out Slab Lab, it's kind of, like, under the radar, but they have put together this, like, toolbox approach of these kind of cards that are prompting good communication skills. And so I think that's another trend that we're seeing, is just, like, how, like, tools that are out there to become better communicators. The funny part is, with all this, is, like, everything that makes me a better ski partner, or a better ski guide, or a better avalanche forecaster, also, like, makes me a better human. So it's, like, pretty mutually beneficial, of, like, just, like, being more self-aware, having better communication skills, being more observant, being more present. Like, the more and more I do this, the more parallels I see to just, like, growth in this whole human experience. So
One question that I have for you is, as the founder and producer of the Avalanche Hour podcast, you get so many interviews that revolve around avalanches, right? And one question that I've kind of been wondering is trends and consistencies that you've seen from producing this show. Like, what's one of the biggest common reasons why people are involved in avalanches that you've heard from the show?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And maybe to clear up the Avalanche Hour podcast and its mission, like my mission was from the beginning to have a podcast like you have, where people are talking about lessons delivered and accidents that have happened in the mountains. And
But it's evolved since then, for sure.
well, I thought that I would just like open that door and like all of these stories would come flooding in, and that has not been the case. You know, there have been a few people that have reached out and wanted to share their stories, but more and more I tend to like kind of pick other avalanche professionals that I know have a lot of experience in this space and interview them and kind of tease out some pivotal moments in their career, and many times those are a lesson delivered or a near miss or an accident. And so I think the trends there are just mostly an overestimation of our ability to manage the avalanche problem, right? Like we think that we're better than we actually are. And I think a lot of those avalanche problems are not all created equal. They have like different characteristics. You know, sometimes I think about them as like safari animals, right? And so, you know, maybe a small storm slab, you know, is not does not have the same consequences as a deep persistent slab that is maybe difficult to trigger, but the consequences of triggering that are like very grave, you know, unsurvivable avalanches. And so I think sometimes we can misapply the context of our ability to manage certain avalanche problems. So I think that's a big trend. I think, you know, a lack of communication or lack of a plan is another major theme. A change in the plan, kind of like, you know, we're all probably pretty familiar with the Swiss cheese model, but kind of like missing the times when some of the holes in the cheese are lining up. We don't recognize that. And then all of a sudden, you know, like our options are way more limited in terms of our terrain or time. We just like have cut the margins way too thin. We kind of paint ourselves into a corner. So I think those are some trends that I've seen. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Super helpful. Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Yeah, and one that we had already mentioned too is for me is scarcity. You know, with some of the interviews that I've had on the show that involve accidents or avalanche accidents. Yeah, it was partially due to scarcity. So it's always really sad, you know, when people feel like, "Well, this is it. Like I won't be out here," or you know, this is the last day of the season or whatever. Um, Causing so much emotional and physical damage as an accident ensues, and they have to manage that. Yeah, it's really sad to listen to and to watch, and I'm guilty of it, right? So, yeah.
Another interesting one to just riff off that scarcity is I had somebody reach out last season and want to share their experience triggering an avalanche and breaking their neck, and they're okay now, but they were thinking about scarcity in terms of climate change and like how many more good winters are we going to have,
Oh, yeah.
and they feel like they have to get it now, which is totally valid. Like I can feel the same way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of interesting of tangible ways to like see beyond that scarcity is like maybe the hardest way. That's like one of the hardest things to try and teach people. Like I don't know how to teach people that to be more patient and to, you know, be okay with missing out. But I think just generally kind of a theme of cultivating a more conservative mindset, you know, and I think as a backcountry community, we need to be embracing that. It's not sexy to like just show. Of course, we want to see videos of people shredding super steep lines, and it's not as cool to show meadow skipping through 30-degree terrain, you know, but like we need to kind of as a culture embrace that and celebrate that and celebrate turning around. And we're seeing some more of that from influential high level athletes of just like cracking the door open on like what it actually looks like to get that shot and how many times they've turned around from certain objectives. And you know, Cody Townsend has done a great job with that with the 50 project and just kind of like showing his vulnerability in him and his team and kind of like what actually goes into getting the shot that so many of us see and then idolize, and maybe some of us try and recreate in our own ways. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the answer is always in the terrain. When we have elevated levels of uncertainty with the weather or with the snowpack, terrain is always the answer. And so, ski to the conditions and not to your desires. And I say ski and I include snowmobiling or snowboarding. But yeah, the answer is always in the terrain, not in your desire.
Anything that's to do with snow, yeah, ice climbing, mountaineering, yeah, exactly, all those things. I mean, I did an accident, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where this group of snowshoers were out and they triggered an avalanche and had a burial. So things that we don't really think of when we're thinking about avalanche zones. But yeah, I mean, you could be snowshoeing down a trail and you could be in an avalanche zone. So anything that has to do with snow.
Hunting. I mean, there's been several avalanche accidents up in Alaska from hunting, right? Like, kind of early season for skiing, but you're out moose hunting or something, and the storm comes in a little quicker than you expect. So I don't know. Hopefully that was all helpful. I mean, another thing that I like to do, kind of a fun game with myself, is to stand at the top of a ski run and ask myself, would I ride this terrain without my transceiver? Would I just leave my transceiver at the top and ski this? And if the answer is no, or if I'm like, if I keep tapping the handle on my airbag pack, like before I'm skiing something, like those little cues of like, I don't know about this, or I might have to rely on this equipment. Like that's telling you a lot. And I think part of what I enjoy in the backcountry is having fun and not being super stressed. And when I'm making decisions that are stressing me out like that, it's usually a cue that I shouldn't be there. And I it's good to listen to that sort of thing. So another thing I do at the top of a ski run is like a pre-mortem. Like, how would the accident, and I know you do this all the time and you preach this on your podcast, it's great, but like do a pre-mortem. Like, what is the accident report going to read? How is it going to read? And, oftentimes that gives me some perspective to really see things pretty clearly, and maybe adjust my plan as needed.
Well, thank you very much. That was also super helpful. Go take an avalanche course if you haven't already. Sign up quickly because definitely in Alaska, a lot of those courses fill up. They're probably all full by now. By November 11th, they're probably all full, which is definitely the unfortunate part of not having as many course options and instructors as we could hope for. But definitely sign up as soon as you can for a course. And remember that just because you've taken a course, you are not an expert. Thank you again so much to Caleb for talking to me about avalanches and how to stay safe this winter. And thank you for listening to my podcast. Thanks to Rocky Talkie and the American Alpine Institute for sponsoring this episode. And don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. And again, if you want more content, head on over to Patreon to sign up. There are so many bonus episodes that you can learn from exclusive to Patreon supporters. And as always, remember, play hard and be smart.